Welcome back to another episode of Sports Talk with Camden. If you guys are enjoying this type of content, you know what to do. And without further ado, let's get into what we're doing today, which is going to be ranking the top 5 teams in each conference in college football. Now, I wanted to start this with the conference that I believe is the weakest out of all the Power 5, and that is the ACC. So let's get right into it. There's a lizard on my window. Ooh. Hey, bud. Oh, you're inside. We just had a hurricane here, so we're kind of going through the motions here, and I figured I'd get a video out for y'all. Number 5 is going to be Duke. I feel like they finished off the year last year pretty strong. They beat UCF in that bowl game. I think if they get up to 8 or 9 wins, then that'll be pretty good for them. Number 4, I'm going to go with Miami. This is honestly pretty hit or miss. Miami is nowhere near the top 25, but I got a guy I know that plays for the team. Their schedule honestly starts out pretty easy. I know they play Texas A&M week 2, but if they win that game, they could easily start out 5-0 before their matchup against, I believe it's Clemson. Okay, I was wrong. At that point, they'd be playing North Carolina on the road, and then the following week, they have Clemson at home. And they're only favored by 9.5 points in that game, which seems kind of low if Clemson's supposed to win the ACC. Don't forget Tyler Van Dyke still on the team. Maybe he could break out, do better than we all thought he would last year. But yeah, I got Miami as the 4th best team in the weakest conference. Number 3, I've got Florida State. This might be controversial, but they are the number 1 ranked team in the ACC according to the AP Top 25, and I just think that's outlandish. I mean, they lost to Clemson last year by 7, I get it, but they were kind of getting beat out of the water before they had a nice little comeback. I'm not buying into the hype with Jordan Travis, and I feel like them being ranked number 8 for not doing too much last year is a little bit too high. I feel like LSU is going to beat them, and they're going to beat them by more than that 2.5 point spread, but we'll see this Monday. And number 2, I've got North Carolina. Now, North Carolina, I get it. Drake May, he's supposed to be an NFL guy, and I didn't watch a lot of North Carolina last year, but I feel like this is still a little bit too high for them to be. Now, they are only ranked 21st, and I feel like they should be a little bit higher than that, but they definitely shouldn't be top 10. They do have a tough start of their schedules. They play South Carolina, they play Appalachian State, and then they play Minnesota, which are 3 not easy games. They're kind of tricky for a Power 5 team. But again, when you got Drake May, a guy that's projected to be a top 3, top 4 pick, your season better be pretty good. Now, number 1, this should be no surprise. I've got Clemson. Clemson, who still, again, I'm going to say this because this is the worst Power 5 conference. They might be overrated. We don't know about Cade Klubnik, but what I do know is that Dabo Swinney has like that winning pedigree that you want as a head coach. And I feel like if there's a team to win the ACC, it's still going to be them. Now that's going to be it for my top 5 ACC teams. Let's move on to the Big 12. Moving on to the Big 12, this conference is going to be really hard for me. This is probably the one I spent the most time on because I feel like they're still a really solid conference, but again, I have them ranked as the 4th best conference in the Power 5. At number 5, I got TCU. I know it's kind of disrespectful to have this team as the 5th best in their own conference when they made it to the national championship last year, but they lost their 3 key pieces in Max Duggan, Deuce Vaughn, and Quentin Johnson. Let me go back and correct myself because I definitely said Deuce Vaughn went to TCU. I meant Kendre Miller. I'm sorry about that. They might take a step back, and that's okay because they do have a little bit of a tougher schedule, even though they have those 4 new teams moving into the Big 12. Go UCF. I didn't want to put my bias in and put any of the 4 teams that I feel like are not going to make a difference in the top 5, so I didn't. At number 4, I've got Kansas, who I feel like is trending upwards. Jalen Daniels and company is going to look for 9 wins. I feel like they can get there. I looked at their schedule, and it's very favorable at some points where they have some games at home, some games on the road. And I feel like after starting, 5-0 and 6-0 last year, something like that, they could make noise again this year and maybe win 9 games. At number 3, I've got a very balanced Kansas State team. Deuce Vaughn also leaving Kansas State, but they do have their quarterback Will Howard back, which should be pretty nice. And again, Urban Meyer did call them a very balanced team, which is why they won the Big 12. And I feel like they can compete for the Big 12, but these 2 top dogs are the ones that you'd expect up there. At number 2, I got Texas. And again, I've got to say, I'm not buying the hype with Texas. I get it. They're ranked 11th, which isn't as high as you'd want them to be ranked as a Texas fan. You're probably thinking they should be top 6, top 7, which I completely disagree with. For starters, who's your quarterback? I mean, Quinn Ewers is supposedly the grown-up, and he almost beat Alabama. I'm very hit or miss on Texas because I don't know if they're going to try to play Arch Manning or not this year. Again, Texas is returning 10 of their 11 offensive starters, which is a really good positive, except for Bijan Robinson, who is a huge loss for them, which is why I've got them number 2. Now, the flip side of this is that Texas could easily beat Alabama. Not easily, but I think they definitely have a shot to do it. As we saw last year, Quinn Ewers was beating them in Texas. The only thing is, every year we hear the same thing where Texas is back, Texas is this, and I'm sure Texas fans don't want me to say that because it's not true. They haven't really done anything. They haven't won their conference in a long time, and so I feel like they don't deserve this ranking of number 11 because they got to show it to me. And number 1 is my sleeper team. I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on them, and that's okay, and that's Oklahoma, who is ranked, I believe, top 20. Maybe they're like 21st, 22nd, somewhere around that area, and that's rightfully so. They were very disappointing last year as they were ranked top 10, but it kind of felt like it was all show without a lot to back it up until they had that tough stretch against Kansas State, against TCU, and against Texas. That's when they fell apart. This is going to be year 2 of Brent Venables and Dylan Gabriel, who went to UCF, by the way. Heard a lot of bad things about him, but that is what it is. I feel like Oklahoma could easily win 11 games this year. I mean, their schedule is kind of favorable for them. They, of course, have the game against Texas, but they lose the out-of-conference game against Georgia because they're moving to the SEC next year. And that's why I think Oklahoma is going to win the Big 12. That's it for the Big 12. Let's move on to the next conference, which is the Pac-12. Starting with the Pac-12, a very good top-to-bottom conference. They have about 6 really good teams in there this year, and I feel like at number 5, I'm going to go with Utah. Cam Rising sustained that injury against Penn State last year. I think he'll be back for at least the start of the season. I could be wrong about that. But again, it feels like it's going to be a year where they might take a step back due to that injury. Kyle Whittingham fails to disappoint ever, so they'll probably at least win 8 or 9 games. But still, these other teams that I'm putting above them are very good. And number 4, another controversial opinion, I'm going with Oregon. Now, Bo Nix was cool last year for a little bit until he played against some better competition like Washington. And I feel like this year, I'm not sure if he's going to take a step forward or a step back. They might be solid, but I don't see them as a contender to win the Pac-12 as of this moment. But we'll see once the first couple of weeks go on. I do have to say these are just my opinions, so please don't get mad at me. Don't scream at me for all that things because, hey, these are just my opinions. We have not seen a lot of football yet. The only teams we've seen play that mattered are Notre Dame and USC, which we'll get to that later. Also, look at this right above, it says subscribe, please do it. And number 3, here's my other sleeper pick. It's going to be Oregon State. I love the team to start with the O, if you know what I'm saying. Oregon State won 10 games last year, and they didn't even have a quarterback. Jonathan Smith is doing a great job in, his 5th or 6th year as coaching Oregon State, and he used to play for Oregon State as a quarterback. Speaking of quarterbacks, they got DJ Uigalungale. We're just going to cut that out. It's DJU. We'll just call him that. And he is there from Clemson. Now, a lot of people didn't like him, but it should be good enough for them to at least win 10 games. And I feel like they can compete for the Pac-12 championship. The only issue is these 2 teams above them definitely have a established quarterback. And that's going to be number 2, Washington, with Michael Penix Jr., the guy from Indiana. Yeah, they're going to throw for about 5,000 yards this year, which is why I think they can compete with the number 1 team, USC. The thing is, on USC's best day offensively, they might still lose because of how bad their defense is. We saw it last week against Kent State or whoever it was, San Jose State, where they gave up 28 points. The only note I even have for USC is Caleb Williams because the team lives and dies by him. I mean, they got a couple weapons on the outside, but it's going to go through Caleb Williams. Their defense still didn't look very much improved, and that's the thing about Washington is I believe that they have a better defense, and when Washington plays their best game offensively, they can compete with USC. That's going to be it for the Pac-12. Let's move on to the next conference, which is the Big Ten. Moving on to the Big Ten, I feel like this was a really tough conference to pick. And I know I watched the most Big Ten football out of all the 5 conferences, and it was still hard for me to figure out what team I wanted to go at number 5. I was really looking at Michigan State, but I just could not justify them having to play 4 games against AP top 10 teams as of the preseason. Anywho, my number 5 team for the Big Ten is going to be Iowa. Now, Cade McNamara comes. I don't really like him. I remember him at Michigan, and I loved him at Michigan because he was not very good, even though he won a game last year or 2 years ago against Ohio State. Now, this is what annoys me, is because they play in the Big Ten West, they don't have to play anybody really from the Big Ten East except for Penn State. They also have to play Michigan State, I believe, but Penn State's the toughest game on that schedule. They do have to play Wisconsin, who's my team up next. I actually really like Wisconsin. It's going to be Luke Fickell in his first year at Wisconsin, and I didn't even know this. They have a quarterback. Why did I not know that Tanner Mordecai went to Wisconsin? I feel like that is a great pickup, and that actually scares me as an Ohio State fan. Number 3 is going to be Penn State. I feel like Drew Aller is going to be that team. They finally have a quarterback who I feel like is definitely better than Sean Clifford, and he's only a freshman. I feel like their floor is 8-4, but realistically, they're probably just going to go 10-2 and lose to Ohio State and Michigan again. Ohio State I have at number 2, which I know this hurts me to say because that means Michigan's at number 1, but Ohio State, they definitely don't have a QB debate. All right, that's going to be solved no matter what. They're going to have a good quarterback, and their wide receivers are improved from last year, which sounds crazy. As long as the defense is improved in year 2 of Jim Knowles, and as long as that offensive line can hold up good enough to get the run game going, they're going to be all right. Now, the only issue is Michigan isn't the best team that they've had in the Jim Harbaugh era, and it's going to be tough because they get Ohio State at home, and they're going to be a favorite for the first time in a very long time against the Buckeyes. JJ McCarthy, I'm still not buying into him entirely. I know they put up 45 against TCU in that great defense. They gave up 65 to Georgia, but I'm still not buying JJ McCarthy. Again, I am picking Michigan to win the Big Ten. Hear me out. As you can see, I'm an Ohio State fan, and I'm picking Michigan to win the Big Ten. It hurts, but I have to be realistic. Pain. That's going to be it for the Big Ten. Let's move on to the last conference, which is the SEC. Moving on to the SEC, this was another issue I had with who I was going to put at number 5, and I ended up going with Auburn. I was trying to look to justify South Carolina, but they have to play too many tough games out of conference. They have to play North Carolina, and they have to play Clemson at the beginning and the end of the year, which is just too hard to think that they're going to try to compete when they're going to be 8-4. Now, I went with Auburn, who also has a tough schedule. I wanted to go with Missouri, but again, kind of the same thing where I don't really trust any of their quarterbacks. But Auburn, they got Peyton Thorne from Michigan State, who is at least an established quarterback in a conference that has good quarterback play, I guess. Auburn does have to play 4 ranked games in a row right before they get to that middle of the season. I believe they have to play Texas A&M, LSU, Georgia, and Ole Miss. It's going to be a tough stretch to get through, which is why I believe they're not going to go anything better than 8-4, 9-3. But if they can potentially split against those teams and maybe even beat a Georgia or beat LSU, it'll be a success for them this year. However, they do get a home game against Georgia. And last year, I know that game wasn't technically competitive, and I think they only lost by like 2 scores. But still, the game, if they get the game at home, never know. Maybe they can keep it within a score, pull out some lucky magic at the end to win the game, just like LSU did. Speaking of LSU, they're my number 3 team. This is where things get crazy because LSU might be able to beat Bama again. It is on the road, but hey, Jayden Daniels is a Heisman contender, and I would pick him right now to be up there with Caleb Williams as who would win the Heisman. The only issue is Bama might be able to beat Georgia too, which kind of makes it seem like these 3 teams might all compete for the best team in the SEC, which is kind of crazy because it feels like it's going to be Georgia, it's going to be Bama, it's going to be LSU. But in reality, it might be LSU being able to compete with Bama and Bama being able to compete with Georgia. Like I said, Bama's number 2. They might be better than Georgia. They have a pretty easy-ish schedule outside of Texas, which they get at home. Again, I believe Texas can win that game, but I don't think they'll be able to. And at number 1, I just have the words "yeah" written because it's Georgia. I wrote down 2 of their tough games, which is going to be week 5 at Auburn and week 11 for them at Tennessee. Now, here's the deal. They also have to play at home against Missouri, and as we saw last year, Missouri gave them a good run for their money. And so maybe this year, Missouri pulls some magic. Maybe he's got Kirby Smart's number. I don't know, but I'm still picking Georgia to be number 1. Now, those were my top 5 teams from each conference. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. Subscribe. The channel name's right up here. You can just click the button, whatever works for you. And I greatly appreciate that. So if you enjoyed, leave me some support. Let me know your thoughts about the top 25 teams I just gave you. And of course, I'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.